as we are in the days. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. This is Faraz Khan. Thank you for joining us. We're going to talk about Hajj and Ayyamul Hajj and the days of Hajj, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He swears by in the Quran, wal Fajr wa layalin ash, and these 10 nights are referred to the days of Dhul Hajjah or Dhul Hijj. And so we're in this beautiful month, and as many of the speakers previously have talked about Hajj, I wanted to take another angle or theme that we could look at Hajj from the possibility of gaining an insight, inshallah. Why do Muslims perform Hajj? And is it the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ who told us to do Hajj, or were there people before us who were also performing Hajj? And as you and I know, that there are stories of Ibrahim alayhi salam, Ismail alayhi salam, Hajar alayhi salam, and they're going back and forth in the time of the story of Zamzam, and how it was basically going back and forth between Safa and Marwa. So that's part of the Hajj rituals as well. So it definitely dates before the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and even the Quraysh, although they were mushrikeen, they were polytheists, they performed Hajj because of their association with their father, or previous generations, forefather Ibrahim alayhi salam. So Hajj has been something just like Salah, just like Namaz, just like Zakah, the charity that we give, even fasting, right? So has been prescribed to people. Fasting has been prescribed to you as it was prescribed to people before you, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in the Quran. So Hajj was also prescribed to people before the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And as you may recall, the Qibla, the story of the Qibla in the second Juz, where it's mentioned that the Prophet ﷺ was commanded to have Mecca as the Qibla. And before that, sometimes the Prophet ﷺ used to face towards the city of Jerusalem, or the Qibla before there, and that was the direction the Muslims would pray. So there's a link. Islam was not the Prophet Muhammad was not the first messenger of Islam. He was actually the last of the messengers that came with the same message, right? And when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says about that the only religion accepted to Allah is Islam, that doesn't mean the Muslims have that religion under their control, and they're not going to let anybody into Jannah. It basically gives us that connotation, the context, that we link to the communities previously were also called Muslims, whether they were the followers of Ibrahim alayhi salam, or whether they were followers of Nuh alayhi salam, or whether they were followers of Ishaq or Ismail alayhi salam, even amongst the Bani Israel, or the followers of Jesus. So all of them are Muslims as long as they submitted to Allah. Now, Hajj in particular, inshallah, I'm not going to take too long, maybe next 5 to 7 minutes, I'm going to talk about it. I want you to understand that this life, there is a war that is happening. There is a battle that is happening. And the battle is between two groups. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He talks about these two groups. And these two groups, in simple language, they're called, either you belong to a party, Hizbullah, the group that is associated with Allah, or Hizbul Shaitan, or the party of Shaitan. So if you are looking at it, the life, it's either party of Shaitan, calling to evil, or party of Allah, those people who are trying to strive and do the good things. And so Hajj is a process where you're taught how to battle, how to go against the shaitani forces, the evil forces. And so the first and foremost, what you do is you enter into miqat. Hajj, there's a time to it, obviously. So this is a big practice that is going to tell you how to become people who are in the army of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who are part of this group who are going to go out and fight the shaitan and shaitani forces. And how do you do that? You do that by first entering into this sacred area, right, where what's called miqat, right, which is the haram of the place where we perform Hajj, qibla of our qibla, where we also wear ihram, which is to wear these two garments for men, unstitched, that you become basically are joining the army, the forces at that time, and that is your uniform. It's given to you. So that's the significance of these things. Now, when you start, each army has, maybe an anthem that they sing, or they sing some words to encourage each other. And how do Muslims, right, those people who have surrendered, submitted to God, how do they respond? What is their anthem? And that call is called the talbiyah, or labbaik Allahumma labbaik, right? You respond by saying labbaik is a term of here I am, like you're responding to some call, right? So it's actually a response, labbaik, that somebody called you or called for help, and you said labbaik, like here I am, O Lord. Allah sharika labbaik, and you're saying that there are no partners to you, O Allah. So that is the response to a call made by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In the Quran, obviously, as we know, that the people will come and they're called to perform Hajj. So you show up and you join the army, you have a uniform, and then there's a set date between 8 and the 13th, right, of Dhul Hijjah, when they're going to be performing this ibadah, right? Now, there are different types of Hajj that you could do, basically going to Mecca, performing Umrah, or not performing Umrah. So there's different ways that the Prophet ﷺ has done it. But the gist of it is the talbiyah, saying labbaik, and then doing the tawaf, was circumambulating the Kaaba, going around the Kaaba, and you keep the heart closest to that's the side you go, and make circles. And then you go between Safa and Marwa, and that is your going back and forth, you're striving for the sake of Allah. Sometimes you're walking, sometimes you're running, right? And that is the army that's going. And then the army stays in a camp, right? And that camp is put together at Mina. And Muzdalifah, you spend the night just before the actual fighting, which fighting meaning the confrontation that would take place between the forces of Shaitan and the forces of Allah. And the people, they prepare and they pick up the pebbles at Muzdalifah. They stay overnight. And then Arafat, as you know, the day without it, there's no Hajj. And that's where Allah's, people show up, people of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala show up. And that is what they're doing. What they're doing is they're recognizing their humanity, and that they're recognizing that they belong to Hizbullah. They belong to Allah's forces, who are to conquer Shaitan. And that's why you're throwing the pebbles after the long-standing dua, and that is your weapon. The actual weapon of a believer, the Prophet ﷺ also explained in a hadith, is dua, is to call on Allah, is to have tawakkul on Allah, is to be patient, is to show istiqamah, to be steadfast at the peak hour, when the time comes and when you see things changing, and when the hearts are almost in your throat, so to speak, as Allah also mentions in the Quran, when the battles would happen. And that's how people felt. Believers, they felt a calmness, they felt tranquility. Believers responded by saying, no, we put our trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that is a state of mind, that is a state of heart. And heart is something, not physical heart where you make the decision making happens. It's actually the spiritual heart. And the spiritual heart is the place where, again, you have to remember, as humans, we're not just physical bodies. We actually have a soul inside of us. And even though the body might be there, if it doesn't have the soul, they're called dead people. And so bodies are buried. That's what happens with bodies. But souls are what makes us something unique, something very special. And these souls have a center, and the center is where the decision making happens. It's the souls that decide. And that center is called qalb. It's called the heart. And that's not the physical heart that you have, the pumping blood and all these things. And a lot of people go into, how come Allah says this, but the heart's really, it's the brain that makes the decision, not the heart. It's not the physical heart we were talking about. It's the spiritual heart. It's the center of the soul that we're talking about in these ayat. So, anyways, so this is again a place where the army of God, the people who are practicing this battle, they're being told that this dunya, you're going to be going against the forces of shaitan. You're going to come across all these things out there that will distract you from Allah and the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And your response should be to recognize that you're in a constant battle. And unless you realize that and unless you recognize it, you're going to go with the flow. And if you're going to go with the flow of all the people around you and the people that are there, you're going to become a loser in the hereafter. So that's the reason why we're reminded with Hajj being a pillar, a center of our life, because Hajj is something you do once. And that's not even required on everyone, but whoever could make it in terms of physical and monetary, fundings being available. And then, so we recognize that. And so after Arafat, you have the Eid for everyone else who's involved. They sacrifice. This is not the people at Hajj, but the people who are doing the Eid. The people at Hajj, they spend next few more days at Mina, and they remove their hair, right, or they cut their hair short. And that in past olden days, it was a significant. It was significant because that act in itself was basically signaled that whoever shaved their head, if you would see that a servant or slave was sold in the marketplace, and they had a master, they would actually shave their heads to indicate that they were sold, or they were in a particular transaction. So the believers, they shave their heads similarly to indicate that their servitude, their way of life is for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they have entered into this contract, this slavehood of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when you shave your head, there's nothing wrong with hair. This is not a sacred hair is not a sacred thing in Islam, but it's the significance of understanding what that action that you're doing is, to have it in your heart that now I have committed my life. Whatever happened in the past happened, but now I have dedicated that I am going to stay committed to the sake of, to this army of God, to this way of life where I recognize that I am here only for a short period of time, and I'm not going to give in or give up to the army of shaitan, and I will be reliant upon making du'as, performing the ritual prayers, and asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for guidance. So that is the fifth pillar in a very short and succinct way, easily explained the reason why we perform Hajj and the significance of these rituals, and behind these rituals, what is the meaning, inshallah. And I hope and pray that if you had performed Hajj, may Allah accept it and give you more reward. And if you plan to go on Hajj, inshallah, make niyyah intention today. Inshallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will take you there. Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Assalamu alaikum.